It is Friday, November 1st. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another Horizon Veilguard episode of LTPS. As always, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. The October PS Plus Essential lineup. Claim those games. This is your final warning. This coming Tuesday on the 4th, it's going to change over to Ghostwire Tokyo, Hot Wheels Unleashed 2 Turbocharged, and then Death Note Killer Within, all PS4, PS5. The Death Note game is brand new. That's launching right into PS Plus Essential, which that game is like up to 10 players online. It's like a social deduction game. Basically, from my understanding, it's like Among Us, more or less. So if you like that, and then also Death Note for the property itself, maybe that's worth checking out. Hot Wheels is unironically a very fun game, so that's actually also a very good offering. And then Ghostwire Tokyo, of course, being that, early lifecycle PS5 game, high profile, with it being timed exclusive next to Deathloop, this one being from Tango Gameworks. Not as well received. I mean, some seem to really enjoy it. I think in terms of the ambiance and the setting and everything, there's a lot more going for that versus Deathloop, but I really enjoyed Deathloop. Either way, it's still something where that game was on PS Plus Extra 2, I think, right when the relaunch happened. It's not on there anymore, from if I remember correctly, but better to have it on your ID. That way, if you claim it, it's always going to be there. So as long as you're subscribed, you can play that game. So actually a pretty decent offering this month, I would say. But moving on to our first news story, let's talk about PlayStation Stars, where we still don't really have a concrete update on what's going on with the lack of redeeming wallet funds on the service. Some people still don't have any option, like me. Some only have 10, 25, and that's really where we are. We still don't know what's going on. I mean, I know some people are now saying they can't redeem games at all, which that was the option that was still there, which that's kind of good news because that might imply that maybe this was a bug. PS Stars for the first year has been really weird and unstable, and it was down for a little bit as well, so maybe it's that, although I'm still inclined to believe that maybe this is intentional A/B testing on a regional basis. They still want to try and analyze consumer behavior, and this would be ideally something where if they get rid of, say, wallet funds completely, then they want to analyze how often people are redeeming games straight up, where the minimums are much higher. If they do have wallet funds, having it at least at $10 makes it so you're encouraged to spend more, and since points expire after a year instead of 2, you're encouraged even more to try and reach that minimum. So that's what I think is probably going on. I know some are trying to also reach out to PlayStation support to get an answer, which, I mean, I get why folks are doing that. They're already sharing screenshots of different results, which here's the thing. I don't know why we ever do this, period. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like a Ron Swanson at Lowe's deal, right? Typically we know more. That's just the reality of it. They only can answer so many things in a very limited, narrow scope. They're not going to tell you things, or they don't know things relating to the PlayStation business well above their pay grade. Doesn't matter if it's about accessories, consoles, hardware, upcoming game releases. They look at public info, basically. They know as much as we do in most cases, and they will have specialized tools to help you with your account. That's it. So we have to stop pretending like they're going to give us an answer. That's why the results are always different, typically. So I will say, don't really listen to PlayStation support. For now, we don't know what's going on, but if I had to guess, I would still suspect this is all intentional, but I hope I'm wrong. Next up, let's talk about Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, which came out yesterday, and also the reviews came out about a day before as well, which, it's Zero Dawn, it's the same game, so if you like it or dislike it, nothing's going to change here. It's more about the quality of the remaster itself, which, as we saw during the initial trailers, comparisons, the Digital Foundry comparisons, the PS blog post, I mean, there is some pretty dramatic differences between the base game and now the remaster, so it is a pretty big improvement, right? So if it's your first time playing Zero Dawn, you are going to be undeniably playing the best version available, and if you're going back in, it will be something where there's a lot to enjoy with all the enhancements that are now on offer. The real news here that I wanted to briefly mention is that there is no Autopop trophies, which is not super uncommon, but it does happen. I mean, typically a lot of games, if there's PS4 to PS5, save file transfer, same trophy list obviously, then you will usually see the Autopop option. or rather, it will just auto-pop in general. It's not an option per se, but when you transfer over a save file, you'll have the auto-pop happen almost immediately for a lot of games. So it's usually fun to platinum on PS4, then get a free platinum on PS5. This game, it does have a save file transfer, same list, no auto-pop, at least based on the latest patch on PSN. So just keep that in mind if you're looking to transfer over a file and just get an auto-pop platinum for, say, $10. Like, don't do that just yet if you're not willing to play through the entire game again. So kind of a bummer there. I will say this. I wish I had the option to transfer files from PS5 to 4. Almost always you can't go backwards, and that's something where, like, there's so many games that got to go back to PS4 and Platinum, but it's like they've all gotten native PS5 versions with higher frame rates, higher res, 40 FPS modes, ray tracing, director's cut, remasters, just a lot of really nice stuff for PlayStation 5. And it's like, well, I do want the auto-pop. I want the 2 platinums. Like, why not, right? But I have to go back to PS4 and play the worst version and then never experience the fun goodies on PlayStation 5 now, which I know I'm splitting hairs on this whole thing, but I wish you could just transfer, continue the list, and then transfer the file back to PS4, finish up your trophies there automatically. So kind of a weird fringe case, but it's, I guess, a little tangent I wanted to rant about there. Moving on to our next news story, this was one of the big ones from this past week, but it is now confirmed via the SIE blog, which was based on this internal email sent from Herman Hulst. But we now know that Firewalk Studios, the developer of Concord, and also Neon Koi, their first mobile studio that they acquired, they are both shut down, or they are shutting down very soon. So the extra details that we have here, since we already talked about this when the news broke initially, but the company did provide this info to Bloomberg where 210 jobs are impacted. So that's 172 at Firewalk and 38 at Neon Koi. Now, Kotaku also put out a report on the news citing 2 sources here on the budget for Concord, where the game's initial development deal was just over $200 million. Very important language here. Initial development deal was just over $200 million based on not 1 but 2 sources, and Kotaku also understands that this amount was not enough for the entire game's development and did not include the studio's acquisition, which that has been a point of contention for some, ever since really Colin Moriarty put out the $400 million figure for the game's development, which he too broke it down as $200 million initially between all stakeholders. So it was not just Sony, it was Sony, probably Monsters, co-founders, any sort of VCs that were involved in funding the game as well. So it was $200 million initially, then another $200 million to get the game over the finish line, which, some can interpret this as maybe the Kotaku number with 2 sources actually being somewhat accurate, given that it's a little over $200 million, and therefore it might actually be creeping into that $300 or $400 million range. Now, I'm still of the mind where I really don't care what the game cost. It was certainly going to be in the multi-$100 million range, because that is what it costs to make games nowadays. So I really find it's less important whether it was 2, 3, or 4, just that whatever it was, they lost all of it, and that is what is notable here, that it was such a high-profile failure from a talented studio, a team that was expected to maybe not fail and just put this thing together right near the end and finally release a really good, viable product. PlayStation, of course, being an established platform holder that also publishes games over a 30-year period, and they certainly must have known about the game. And so there's still so many things that could be said. Going back to our discussion when the news actually broke out, I still find the other interesting angle is Neon Koi, where that too was such a big failure in that this was their first mobile studio acquisition when they formed the PlayStation Studios mobile division, and it seemed like, wow, they are really trying this time around for mobile games. So I'm just going to retread the same thing I already said in that conversation. There's really no new info here per se. So I think we'll leave it there. Just, both these things were huge failures. The one point I'll really punch home here before we close this out is they're not going to give up. These are still 2 growth vectors for the company. They've always been good at single player, and they've still got that stuff in the pipeline. They have not really nailed down these other areas that they are underrepresented in. This isn't going to stop them. What I sincerely hope is they take these lessons learned, hard lessons learned, and they go about it and apply it properly into the next round of games. And in the case of mobile, I mean, they're so far behind. Who knows when we'll see something from the PlayStation Studios mobile division. I mean, it's crazy. They had one studio, now they have none. So live service is not going anywhere. We'll still have mobile games at some point, but there's just a lot of roadblocks, and they're learning the hard way, which, if anything, if there's any good that can be said about it, learning the hard way is maybe the way to do it. They just have to take these lessons and apply them properly, and more so when you know jobs are at stake. It really does suck to have studio closures. That's not something I ever like seeing, so my heart goes out to all those affected with these 2 recent closures. Moving on to our next story, we've actually got another corporate shakeup style thing going on, this time at Insomniac Games, where this was initially reported on by Stephen Totilo on his newsletter GameFile, where we're hearing Brian Horton, the creative director at Insomniac Games, where he previously served that role on Miles Morales, and he was doing that on Marvel's Wolverine, but that's the news here. He's actually been off on Wolverine since this past summer, according to 2 sources. The game is now in the hands of Marcus Smith as creative director, and that's been confirmed from an SIE representative, and Mike Daly is also the new game director on Wolverine. Previously, that was Cameron Christian, who is still at the studio, just in a different role. Both Marcus and Mike previously held the same roles on Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, and so the big shakeup here is that the reason for this was apparently due to creative differences on the game, and that's, again, according to 2 sources speaking with GameFile. So with Brian Horton, he's actually at Xbox Game Studios now as creative director at the initiative on Perfect Dark, which I don't know why, but I thought about this. I'm like, oh, that... So it's weird because we always have these sort of circumstances where, you know, certain studios can be not like a rotating door, but like just developers will always sort of bounce around because that just, it happens in this field. So Drew Murray, I know, he was a long time Insomniac for like 10-something years as like a design director. He left Insomniac to go work on the initiative as well. He left that project, though, came back to Insomniac to wrap up Spider-Man 2. I don't think he's with the company anymore, but it's just funny how you have those, you know, somewhat large roles sort of shift in and out occasionally. But in this case, I mean, yeah, it's creative differences. So it's one of those things where there's some speculation as to what that may or may not mean for the game. This is something where we, again, have some context clues that we can insert here based on the Insomniac breach, which we have to be very careful around that, given that things change rapidly. And so it's not concrete info, but it can, you know, clue us in a little bit on what we're expecting out of Marvel's Wolverine. And so we do know that, well, obviously a lot of material leaked out for the game. We're not talking about that per se, but that is at least a indicator of how far along the game was at the time. And then there's also the matter of, we know the release timeline expected for that game is 2026. So still quite a bit away, which means in terms of creative differences, that could mean a number of things. It doesn't necessarily mean the game is going to see some sort of massive delay, or it has to take this kind of U-turn where it's going to really hurt the progress being made on the game. And I would also say the game is probably still in good hands. You know, Marcus and Mike, I think they're both longtime Insomniacs. They've done a lot of time at the studio, if I remember correctly. So it's not like the game's in a bad spot. It really depends on the severity of creative differences and where they really want to take the game. But it's just something where we do at least have an idea that based on the breach, the game is pretty far along to the point where, like, if they're looking to do 2026, in theory they should hit that, but we at least have those context clues as we sort of analyze the game going forward. So with that in mind, that's the latest update, and we still probably have to do some waiting. We did have that rumor about maybe hearing something out of Marvel's Wolverine before the end of this year closes out, so that would be nice, and certainly in light of this news, just to sort of, I guess, quell fears on the progress of this game right now. In other Insomniac news, and also PS5 Pro adjacent, we also have the patches out right now on PSN for Spider-Man 2 and Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart for their PS5 Pro enhancements. And we actually do have a little surprise in there, which is something we did not know up until right now, which is some extra granular settings for those games, which in typical Insomniac fashion, they are leaning more into the more technical aspect of PlayStation hardware, and so they are offering something I have not seen just yet on base consoles or Pro. I'm pretty sure this is the first time we've ever seen this, which is the option of toggling ray tracing. So both Spider-Man 2 and Rift Apart will have this option where you can set reflections to medium or high, and then you can also set RT ambient occlusion to off, medium, or high, which will then change the performance of the game based on the setting that you do choose. It's a very granular setting, similar to PC. So far, base consoles and Pro, it's very much a typically 2-setting thing. We do have a lot of examples of some studios offering 3 or even 4 modes, which will sometimes relate to like 120 hertz container modes and things like that. So there's always that option, but generally it's performance, fidelity, pick your poison, which not a bad thing, obviously. More options, always better. But in this case, it's a granular setting that we've not seen from game studios just yet. There might have been other examples, but it's just a matter of, this is cool, and I would really like to see this be a more commonplace thing. It might actually be more beneficial to studios. I wouldn't know, but I would have to figure that maybe as far as like the development pipeline goes for a studio that's shipping on, let's say, console, maybe PC down the road, or more so for a multi-platform third-party studio that's going to ship on PC and console day and date, that it might actually make more sense to just start offering these settings on the console experience as well. Not to the same degree as what you would find on PC, but having a few sliders here and there for some of these settings that just might be more beneficial for the players, for them to really fine-tune their experience on console, which has not really been a thing historically in the console space. So it's definitely cool, and I love that Insomniac is the one that is really sort of dipping their toes into that option on what are 2 very high-profile, gorgeous-looking games on PlayStation 5, obviously. So going into PS5 Pro, maybe even PlayStation 6, we might see more of this. I mean, PS5 Pro thus far, a lot of games are opting for a sort of one Pro setting, which is high frame rate, leaning on PSSR to clean up the image quality. But there's just so many different examples we've seen thus far, and I really value that. I think that's great. Moving on to more PS5 Pro news, we now also know that the console is in the hands of the press. Sounds like they only just recently got it too, which is not really that much time to sit down and play it and do comparisons and really formulate an opinion on the thing, because it's coming out next week. It's very soon. We do know the embargo is set for the 4th. That's for unboxings, and then the 6th is reviews. So one day before the console actually does come out. But with that said, what we can talk about right now is we now have a definitive answer on the console cover situation, which this kind of already was confirmed. We talked about this 1 or 2 weeks ago because we had that Amazon Japan listing where we had an official SIE made image showing that compatibility chart for PS5 accessories, and they did confirm there the slim covers do not fit on the Pro. Still a very weird thing, obviously, but we did have somebody chime in on the PS5 subreddit who had the console on hand, and they just also confirmed in the flesh that yes, the console covers do not transfer over. More specifically, the bottom ones both fit, not just the console, or the disc cover I should say, which we knew that one was going to work. Both bottom ones fit. The top ones don't. So the clip arrangements are ever so slightly different to where the top ones do not fit on the console. And it was only after all of this that SIE finally provided a statement to IGN where they say, and I quote, PS5 console covers are not compatible with PS5 Pro. However, players will be able to swap out different console covers for PS5 Pro when they become available in the future, which is the exact language they used initially on the PS blog, which is what, kickstarted this whole thing, where we thought, they look like the same size. The console even looks like it was mindfully designed to accept the old covers, but them saying when they become available, kind of damning evidence. Now, I will say, very weird decision, right? I mean, it's so bizarre. Not even so much from the perspective of the customer where, there are going to be some people that have, let's say, a Slim right now. They swapped out the colors and they want to upgrade to PS5 Pro. Now they got to buy new covers. That's totally bogus. That sucks. And there can certainly be the accusation of, wow, Sony trying to nickel and dime. My God, ridiculous. I can't believe this company is doing this. Sure. I'm just baffled. Why would Sony not want to do this, right? I get it. The plastic that they make with these things, they've got to be highly profitable. They're charging a lot for what are console covers. But to do it again, I'm not actually seeing it. From their point of view, this it just sounds like a pain. From their point of view and the consumer, I mean, now you have to fulfill another set of covers with different permutations, obviously, because they can be different colors, and they're fulfilling these things on their own from PlayStation Direct. The covers are kind of big and bulky in terms of size, so it's just making them, the boxes, fulfillment, storing them. It's like why would you not just want to make it so the compatibility works between the two covers? It doesn't make any sense for Sony. Like, why would you want that hassle? So I think it's completely bizarre. It's dumb. You had the opportunity very closely to align and mold that plastic to accept the covers. I don't know why they wouldn't do that, but there you go. Now it's like super confirmed. If it wasn't already, you have to buy new covers for the PS5 Pro if you want to swap out the colors. Next up, let's talk about PSVR 2, where you might remember we had a story about one developer sharing their experience selling on PSVR 2 with their 3D platforming game, Max Mustard, where the game actually was doing way better on PSVR 2 initially versus their sales on the MetaQuest, which some lost context there. The game went on sale on MetaQuest. It went down to like $3 right before the PSVR 2 version. Then more people bought the game, more positive buzz was spread about the game, and maybe that was influencing the launch sales for PSVR 2. So there is that to consider. I want to just put that out there. But we do have another developer chiming in, reporting the same thing. So the developer behind Snow Scout, which launched on PSVR 2 about 2 months ago, well, first and foremost, the PC version of that game, they say, like, bombed super hard. So they're reporting good sales for their game, which based on their calculation, they're expecting the lifetime sales on PSVR 2 will be enough to fully pay for the port, which is not really enough as far as like the business goes. You want to make money. You don't want to just break even on the port, because they actually do outline that their first PSVR 2 game, Rainbow Reactor Fusion, that one also bombed pretty hard as well. But they did write, as far as Snow Scout goes, they say, and I quote here, the PSVR 2 version made more money in its first month than in the entire 2 years the game was available on PC. So that is our second example now of a developer actually doing quite well on PSVR 2. That's great. I mean, I just want to see more. I want to hear more experiences and find out what really is the expected mileage. I mean, is it something similar to what I was getting at with, the PS Vita example, which is install base might not be that big, but the kind of buyers that have that handheld, or in this case, this headset, they're really engaged buyers. They have expendable income and they love playing this kind of software. And so they're the kind of buyers that buy a lot of games per headset sold. Install base doesn't always tell the full story in terms of sales performance for various games in different studios. So this will vary a lot. I don't necessarily want to hear just the thing I want to hear, like for confirmation bias. I want to hear the good and bad. I would love for more VR developers to share their experiences on PSVR 2, because I would suspect that for some, you probably are going to get this kind of example, which is they might actually do better on PSVR 2 versus PC VR, or in the case of MetaQuest. That headset has a lot of units out there, but that does not guarantee good sales. Moving on to our next story, we have a new interview that came out from Variety speaking with the two CEOs, that being Hideaki Nishino, the CEO of the Platform Business Group, and Herman Hulst, the CEO of the Studio Business Group. And I'll tell you right now, this interview was kinda useless. Not many things asked and not really anything noteworthy in there. I mean, we've got some things which we'll discuss, but this was more or less a fluff piece that did not really tell us a whole lot of anything. But having said that, we will mention that for the two CEO roles, Nishino-san did clarify that it's not a co-CEO thing. It's indeed meant to be two CEOs where they run their own specialized area, which does create inherent tension, but they do think it's some kind of healthy dynamic to grow the business. So Herman estimates that 80% of their day-to-day is spent managing their discrete areas. And interestingly, the interviewer, Jennifer Moss, says Hulst and Nishino have adopted a show, don't tell leadership style at PlayStation, which has been broadly very true, but it's the responses from Hulst and Nishino that are a bit strange. So Hulst says, and I quote here, "It's important we convey our strategy, but at the end of the day, I'm with the creators a big chunk of time." And Nishino-san says, and I quote, "To me, the product, the content, it should be the forward-facing things. Behind the scenes, who is the guy doing it? It doesn't matter." I don't really care for that answer. I'm somebody that does value that kind of thing, the transparency and communication of showing me the voices and the faces behind the products I enjoy. So as far as a leadership principle that we might see from Nishino-san going forward, I'm not really a fan of that. I mean, it's still fresh days here of these two leading the organization, which they still had very similar outgoing roles. So conceivably, a lot of what we've seen so far during PlayStation 5 is already very reflective of the decisions they made previously, at least with PlayStation 5. And we all know this. It's very different with how they communicate versus PS4, which was not that long ago per se, but we've had a lot of corporate turnover, obviously. Just that during the PlayStation 5 cycle where they stopped going to all the trade shows, now they do PS blog posts, more state of plays, but there's that. They tweet a lot. The PS blog post typically will have a lot of things showing the people that have talked about the game, made the game. You'll have somebody from the studio outline, what they've done with this particular entry or this and that. I mean, they do have communication. It's just, it seems less so, and it is to a degree, but it depends on how you frame it. More so when you can say undeniably that how they announce games is a lot different, and that's maybe more of the show don't tell approach, which is a pick your poison style thing, because for some it's like, hey, can we just go back to the game announcements maybe 2-3 years out and then multiple trailers right up until release? Or is it a matter of, here's the game, maybe a year goes by and then trailer, another launch trailer, game's out? Or a shorter turnaround window, which some games have seen, like your Returnal, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, and a handful of other games thus far. It's just one way of doing things. One is not necessarily better than the other. Now, we can also talk about PlayStation Productions, where Hulst said that they do have 10 projects right now in the works, and that going forward, they will be increasingly meticulous and rigorous about franchising. But everything else in the interview is complete fluff. So they're asking about, or they were asked about PS5 Pro and its position with next gen. They don't say anything new there. They were asked about the layoffs, which this interview was conducted before the closure of Firewalk and Neon Koi, so they don't give an answer there, and they just give the standard answer of like, oh, it's tough, we run a business, but the business is bigger than it was 5 years ago. So it's a very controlled interview with an established legacy company like Variety. So what can you really expect? But with PS Productions, that answer I do like, which is don't just fling IP out the door and just let anybody take it and accept pitches from anywhere, and it doesn't matter who the showrunner is or the director. I mean, so far I like what they've done with PS Productions. A lot of it has been generally very good. One could even make the argument that the only miss was Uncharted. And even that was a movie that I still find was not bad. Not what I wanted, but I enjoyed it for what it was. So I think you could make a good case that how they've approached PS Production so far has been the right play. This is good IP. You don't want to just have the name sullied by throwing bad adaptations out there. So that I think was the right call. In other PlayStation Productions news, we can also mention Twisted Metal Season 2 has now wrapped filming, confirmed by the showrunner Michael Jonathan Smith. So the show is now going to go into post-production, and probably won't be too long to see what they're cooking up with that show as well. Still have not watched the first season, but I keep hearing that, oh my god, the show was actually good. So there's that. And you can enjoy the tease that Michael Jonathan Smith did put up in this post. But Season 2, Twisted Metal, maybe we'll see a lot more developments going on with that lore, which there's a lot to explore with Twisted Metal. That much I do know. Next up, we have something that is, for me at least, I think amazing to see, which is the PlayStation 3 Boomerang controller. We all remember this prototype controller shown off during E3 2005, and that was basically it. This thing was never seen again, but we did have it recently pop up this past week, where this was shared by a hardware designer at Sony over on Twitter during this recent exchange with Obsolete Sony. A lot of you might be familiar with them, and we found out that the Boomerang controller is displayed on the 16th floor with other PlayStation 3 models, including the final example PS3 Super Slim off the assembly line, where it was, celebrating the final production of the console, and the listed units on there made are 88,159,116 units. Such a cool thing to see. I love this stuff so much. I gobble it up. I would kill to be able to see the Boomerang controller in person, because my god, that thing is just so goofy but also very cool at the same time, and I love that it is being properly archived and preserved at Sony themselves, and it's proudly on display in this like cabinet that people can just walk past day in and day out. That is so cool. I love that was shared, and it's just it's an amazing thing to see. I was like, that is so awesome. So more of that, please. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X, and if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. Follow the link down below, enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week, because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and we had a lot going on. So Tuesday we had 2 uploads, one being a collection update, episode 15, so if you want to see where I'm spending my money and buying video games, you can go check that out. And then we also had the breaking news, which was Firewalk and Neon Koi shutting down, so that's where we had a more thorough talk there. And then the other upload, which was then pushed to yesterday, was 30 Platinums Part 1, 2, 3, all grouped together in one upload, since that is a trend nowadays. People like watching everything all in one go, or having it just sit and you can be in the background doing whatever you want to do. I hear all the time that people love rewatching 30 Platinum, so there you go. Hopefully that's something that you can start using that now to rewatch and just have it set in the background, because that is my habit too. I do it all the time, so usually I do like those kinds of uploads as well. And then coming up, we do have, I think, possibly 2 more uploads, but we have PS5 Pro right around the corner, so that following weekend I will be very busy trying to put up as much as I can about the console and covering as much as we possibly can as well, so just bear with me on that. But otherwise, that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.